Hello, my name is Doug Cram. I'm the Extension Forest and Fire Specialist here at New Mexico State University. I'd like to recognize my partners in this webinar today, Suzanne DeVos-Cole, our agent in Mora County, and Sid Gordon, our agent in Otero County, as well as all the agents across New Mexico who you can reach upon to help you out. Here's our old extension logo, research, teaching, and the base rock of a land grant extension. And here's our new logo, sort of representing the state of New Mexico as our campus. And sure enough, in all 33 counties, we have an agent, so feel free to tap into them for more information. So how did we get here, or how did you get on this webinar? That may be self-evident, but just to make sure we cover the background, again, we're calling this Learning to Live with Fire. That sort of highlights this idea of a paradigm shift. So we live on a fire planet. What do I mean by that? Well, as long as we've had plants and then oxygen and fuel and lightning, right, we've had fire on this planet. And for the foreseeable future, looks like we're going to have some more fire. We've been suppressing fire, say about 1910, the Big Burn. We really thought about that time, wow, fire suppression is really great. Let's exclude fire and exclude prescribed fire and not use wildland fire. And so we've been building, suppressing fuels and building up, suppressing fires and building up fuel loads. And then when you add in people and homes to the wildland-urban interface, as we say, and mix in climate, and most notably the Southwest drought, in our case over the last about 22 years, then you get your all the mixings for disaster, wildland fire disaster. I included these graphs to sort of illustrate what I just sort of mentioned. An increase in acres burning through the years, an increase in number of fires in New Mexico. Really, I thought this statistic was interesting. 1.4 million people in New Mexico, or about 70% of the population living in an elevated fire risk. But kind of as we've seen over the last few years, and I'll show you slides here in a minute, I mean, if you live in a home that's likely to burn, in other words, something other than a concrete box, then really, you're potentially at risk in New Mexico for wildland fire. Here's some sort of startling images we've seen over the last 5, 10, 15 years. This is the Tubbs fire out in Santa Rosa, 2017. 5,000 structures burned in a, not in a forested environment, right? This is a home-to-home ignition. Of course, the campfire in Paradise, California, staggering 18,000 homes. That fire started at 6:30 in the morning. And you can see by 8 o'clock, it was at the doorstep of Paradise. By the end of the day, again, lost 18,000 structures, most of those homes. It was a deadly fire, about 85. Is that right? I can't remember. 85 lost lives. We've had our own destructive wildfires in New Mexico, Cerro Grande fire in 2000. Little Bear Fire outside of Ruidoso. View Park Fire not so long ago. Here's the Bosque Fire and Ironworks Fire, as it's called, outside of Belen in 2019. This fire started over here in private land and then quickly got into the Bosque, jumped the river. By the way, oftentimes we hear fire managers talk about a fire break or a fire line, and this sort of illustrates, what could be better than a river as a fire break? Well, as we're starting to learn these days, right, it's easy for these fire brands to jump these fire breaks, this river in this case, and get into the Bosque and keep on going on the other side. As noted, it can burn pretty intense when it gets into that Bosque. Well, one of the reasons you might be tuning in is, unfortunately, tragically, if you will, the 2021 Marshall Fire occurred, in this case, a couple months ago, in between Christmas and New Year's, right? Not the time of year in Colorado, outside of Boulder, they were thinking about wildland fire. And you can see from this picture, certainly not a forested environment, right? It started in a brushland. It had pretty significant winds, a wind slope event, 100-mile-an-hour winds reported, but let's just say sustained winds at 50, and this is the results we get. So just to kind of put that into perspective, here's a drone shot, again, of a neighborhood that, again, you can see pretty much home-to-home ignition. You see that cul-de-sac? This is what that cul-de-sac looked like before the fire. So if your home or neighborhood looks something like this, or in the 2020 Alameda fire out there in Oregon, if your community, your home looks something like this, and so forth, then maybe that's why you're tuning into today's webinar. Of course, if your home looks like this, you should probably just log out right now, go grab the chainsaw and get to work. Or this might be a better option, might be better off here. So here's just to illustrate, no matter where you are in New Mexico, no matter what your home looks like, you are potentially at risk for wildland fire. Over the last 30 years, this is a footprint of all the fires we've seen in New Mexico. So again, learning to live with fire. You have 5 minutes to evacuate. The take-home message for today's webinar, leave early. Right? How do you do that? You follow the evacuation checklist. So we recently put together this cool magnet, and if you go to any one of your county offices, they have this magnet. You can also have a website where you can download that checklist. We'll be going through that today. And as a note, forget the garden hose. So again, leave early. The evacuation time window, it's an estimate, right? If you get a call or if the sheriff's knocking at your door and say, hey, you have 2 hours to evacuate, yeah, that's just an estimate. There's no guarantees that that's correct. And oftentimes, as we've been seeing on these wind events, it could be like you have 5 minutes. You have a matter of moments to evacuate. Remember, everybody's doing it, right? All your neighbors are doing the same thing. So if you're told you have 2 hours and you take all 2 hours and your neighbors took 1 hour, well, when you get out there on the streets, you might find yourself in gridlock. Again, as a reminder, this is not the time to firewise your home or start to hardening your home to the effects of wildland fire. And like I said, it's not the time to get out the garden hose. These pictures sort of help drive that home. This is from a fire up in Alberta, Canada, a few years ago. And again, whatever time you spend evacuating, it stands to reason you might get out there on the road and be in gridlock. So you want to avoid that. Tragically, again, here's the campfire. You can see how hot that fire got. I presume this is maybe from aluminum wheels that melted. That's pretty hot. I think 5 or probably 7 to 10 individuals lost their lives in the vehicles. So pretty tragic. Again, the sooner you can leave, the better off your chances are. In this photo, really to illustrate this idea, it's sort of natural to think, oh, like, maybe I can't stop a hurricane or an earthquake or something like that, a tsunami, but maybe I can, a wildland fire, I think I'll stay, get on my garden hose, and, well, that's just not going to work, right? If that was a useful approach, probably all the fire departments in the country would be like, hey, just, stay and get out your garden hose, and you'll have great success. As you can see from this picture, right, it's hot, it's windy, the smoke, the flames, it's just, right, you can see from this picture, it's really not doing anything to slow down this wildland fire. So just sort of forget that. Now, in some of our future webinars, we'll be talking about how you can firewise your home, as you can see over here on the right, as opposed to over here on the left. And again, that's not today's webinar, but there are steps you can take to harden your home to make it survivable, right? Maybe not defensible, right? Because you're not going to be there to defend it. The fire department probably won't be either. How can your home survive wildland fire? There are some techniques to help it survive that. Okay, so I'm going to run a video here. Hopefully that works. This is from the Gatlinburg fire. It is at nighttime, but in the campfire, you saw some of these videos of folks evacuating. The campfire was in the morning, again, 6:30, right? We talked about that start time. And some of these videos look the same way. It's dark. You'd think it was at nighttime. And that's because of the thick smoke that these fires create. So I want you to pay attention in this video. Look at all the embers. We're probably talking about tens of thousands, if not millions of embers blowing, all right? This is how these wildland fires spread, not necessarily this wall of flames moving across the landscape. So let's watch. Okay, so again, that's the environment you'll be faced if you don't leave early, right? Or sometimes just because of the nature of how quick the fire is moving, even if you leave early, you might be stuck in that environment. But you can see the intense flames, all the embers, and then I like to think in this video, they stopped because they ran into a downed power line or a tree that fell over that's burning, or heaven forbid, somebody that's walking on the road and they didn't see them, or the emergency crews coming in. So it's a hectic, stressful environment the longer you wait for the wildland fire situation. So leave early. So again, we put together these wildfire evacuation checklists. We're going to go through this list relatively quickly here. The alliteration, the 10 Ps. So the first one is probably self-explanatory. It's people, right? You don't really need to think about or check your checklist to think, what do I need to evacuate first? If it's truly minutes or moments to evacuate, then you want to think about, how much time do I have? How many people do I need to evacuate? Are there any special considerations I need? A walker? Do they need a wheelchair, car seats, special vehicle? What about getting out on a particular road? So these are things you might want to think about when you're thinking about evacuating people. Again, you don't really need a checklist, but it's like we get people out first. You might think if you have a little bit more time, again, it's hard to know what that might mean. But if you know you have a neighbor that maybe is homebound or elderly that may need assistance, you might think about checking in on them. Now, just 12 years ago, we probably wouldn't have had, we would have had the 9 Ps, right? We would have had phone on our list. But as we know today, is almost all of us have a smartphone. Of course, this is a vital communication tool, which can be really important in an emergency situation, particularly a wildland fire. Right, there's multiple lines of communication on your phone, certainly a phone. Texting, oftentimes when I'm in the field, I can't send out a phone call, but I can send out a text. So that can be useful in an emergency. Email, social media, different apps, right? All these communication tools on our phone can be really useful. And, right, many of our phones can track us and show us, provide us directions and even sometimes show traffic, so that can be useful. And in some cases, if you turn on the feature, you can actually be tracked. So maybe a loved one or someone can be tracking you and maybe even relaying information to you, but if nothing else, they can maybe see where you're at, right, which provides them first responders with more information. And prescriptions, right? This is basically what I call medications. And this isn't over-the-counter drugs, right? These are things you'll be grabbing on your way out of the house. They're insulin, an inhaler, an EpiPen, heart medication. Again, things you can't buy over the counter readily or quickly, easily, right? You're leaving your home. It may not be anything to return to, right? Or you may not be able to return for 6 or 12 or 24 or 48 hours or more, right? So if you have that medical grab bag, that could be useful. Now we labeled the first 3, right? Again, people's obvious, grab your phone, grab your prescriptions. The rest, there's really no order here, right? And again, they're on our evacuation checklist, which if you grab off the magnet, sometimes it's pretty stressful, right? Like, what do I need to grab if you haven't prepared? So this checklist can help you walk through that. Pets, oftentimes, something we definitely want to think about. In our next webinar, we'll be going through all 10 of these again in more detail and talking about, for example, how to prepare your pets, how to prepare photos, how you can back them up. Different ways to do that so that when the fire strikes, you won't be in a panic to figure out to go through all these lists. You'll be more proactively prepared. The pocketbook, what's that? Well, my wife's from the East Coast, so pocketbook, that's your wallet, your purse, maybe your money clip, right? These things, if you have them, it just makes it easier when you're evacuated from your home. A personal computer, or yes, a Mac as well, right? Oftentimes on our PCs, right, our photos or our papers are on there, our contacts, so it can be really useful to grab a computer, a laptop, right? Forget the monitor. If it's a heavy, desktop, maybe you can grab that, or an external hard drive. These are all useful things that will, if your home happens to burn up and if you grab your PC, that's pretty handy. Personal items, what are we talking about here? Chargers, for example, for your phone or for your computer. Clothes, toiletries, water bottles is certainly something to think about. These are things that, again, if you're not able to return to your home for 48 hours or maybe longer, but the first 48 hours, it'd be useful to have. The wildland urban interface, you might think about long pants, long sleeve shirts. when you're evacuating, particularly that are 100% cotton, not polyester. Right, that would melt. Polyester that could be could make things more difficult for you, more prone to injury. Leather gloves, boots, wool blankets in your car, or the sunscreen can actually block out a lot of heat. So just things to think about if you don't have much time to evacuate. Again, we'll be talking in our next webinar, what is priceless? We have a spot on our magnet, a blank spot where you can write in, Elvis record collections. That helps remind you to grab that. Again, we'll be talking about what are priceless items and how can we maybe be more prepared to evacuate. And last is papers. I think sometimes we think, oh, wow, like all these papers I need to grab. But really, most documents are not necessarily that important. Certainly, if they're government-issued documents, it's pretty easy to replace those government-issued documents. Now, a few things you might want to think about taking: last living and last will, power of attorney, trust documents, healthcare directives, and the like. Right? These are things you may have put together with your attorney, and actually having recently gone to do this, don't count on your attorney to have that paperwork. They may have helped you put that together, but they don't necessarily have that paperwork. So those are a few things you may want to have, maybe in a safe deposit box, maybe backed up in the cloud, maybe in a home safe. Again, we'll talk about these things in our next webinar. Those are some paperwork, some papers you may want to grab before you head out the house. So again, you can leave early, turn on your headlights, drive with caution. So now in our webinar, we'll take questions and comments. Additional resources for those of you at home. Again, if you visit New Mexico, any of our extension agents, any of our offices in the counties, they have these wildfire evacuation magnets. You can put that on your fridge and use that to help you walk through that in the event of a wildfire. Or you could go to our website, just Google NMSU wildfire evacuation, and you'll find a link to our magnet. So you can email me or call me if you got any questions, and hopefully this is useful.